The docking clamp released with a sound like a bone snapping, and I already knew this place was not going to be kind to me. Vethera Station hung in the dark like a wound that refused to close. It was not beautiful. Nothing about it was designed to be. Every corridor, every panel, every surface told the same story in the same cold language. This is a place where things are decided, and the decisions are rarely gentle. I pulled my bag over my shoulder, stepped off the transport, and joined the line of cadets moving through the entry gate. There were 41 of us in the human cohort, 41 out of a total enrollment of 612 candidates from 19 different species. I did the math without trying. We were not the smallest group. The Sorbonne had brought only 12, but we were the most watched. I could feel it in the way the station staff logged our entry codes twice, the way the orientation screens cycled through their standard welcome message and then added a small, almost apologetic footnote when it reached the human language track. Classification: non-warrior. Provisional entry: see Appendix 7. I had read Appendix 7 3 times on the transport. I could recite it. I chose not to think about it. The interstellar combat trials had been running for 230 years by the time humanity submitted its first cohort application. It had taken us 4 application cycles to be accepted. The first 2 were rejected without comment. The third came back with a note suggesting we pursue the administrative track instead, which was politely worded and clearly meant to be permanent. The fourth application, submitted by a woman named Dr. Elaine Voss, yes, my grandmother, came with 47 pages of supporting documentation, 3 independent capability assessments, and a diplomatic letter signed by every human head of state at the time. They let us in on a provisional basis and filed us under a category that had not been used in 60 years. Non-warrior species, combat adjacent. It was a category invented for a species of archivists who had shown up once, competed in the theory portions, and quietly gone home. Nobody had used that category to enter the dueling circuit. Not once. Not in 60 years. I found my bunk assignment, dropped my bag, and stood at the small porthole window for a moment. The stars outside did not care about any of this. That was one thing I had always found steadying about space. It held no opinion of you. You were either moving or you were not. I turned away from the window. My bunk was in a 4-person room. 2 of the other bunks were already occupied. Cadet Nate Osei sat on the lower left bunk, reviewing something on his datapad, his expression the calm and organized face of someone who had been preparing for this for years. He looked up when I came in, gave me a short nod, and went back to his reading. On the upper right, Cadet Lena Reyes was lying flat on her back, staring at the ceiling with her hands folded on her stomach. She did not look up. She said, without any introduction, "The simulation weight matrices favor multi-limbed species. The scoring algorithm has a torque calculation that literally does not account for human shoulder anatomy. I already found 2 places where our scores will be automatically suppressed before a human evaluator even sees them." I set my bag down. "Did you file a complaint?" "I documented it," she said. "Filing a complaint in the first 12 hours would make us look fragile. I will file it on day 9, when it looks like due diligence instead of nerves." I liked her immediately. Nate looked up again. "Mira Voss," it was not a question. "I read your application file. Your grandmother was Elaine Voss." "She was." He nodded slowly, the way people nod when they are deciding how much weight to give something. "No pressure then," he said, and the corner of his mouth moved very slightly. I sat on my bunk and started unpacking. At the bottom of my bag, under the folded clothes and the training gloves and the small photograph of my mother, standing outside the flight academy, where she had trained 20 years ago, there was a small cloth pouch. Inside the pouch were 6 elastic hair ties, plain, dark, unremarkable. I had been using them since I was 14 years old, training in the school gym back on Earth, pulling my hair back before every sparring session the same way, like a small private signal to my own body. "We are doing this now. We are ready." I put the pouch in the drawer beside my bunk and closed it. The orientation session was held in a hall, large enough to make the 612 of us look scattered rather than crowded. The ceilings were high and the light was the particular shade of pale blue that I later learned was standardized for multi-species visual comfort. Bright enough for species with limited low-light vision, dim enough not to cause distress for species whose eyes operated at lower tolerances. It made everyone look slightly underwater. The trial structure was explained in a format that managed to be both exhaustive and oddly uninformative, the way bureaucratic language always manages. 3 phases. Phase 1, tactical theory. Phase 2, simulated warfare, individual and unit formats. Phase 3, the dueling circuit. Each phase was scored independently. Combined scores across all three determined final ranking and certification eligibility. The dueling circuit was described as a direct single combat evaluation of physical and strategic capability. It was listed as optional for species filing under non-warrior classifications, but was noted as significantly weighted in final scoring for command track candidates. Significantly weighted, that was one way to say it. Another way to say it was, if you do not compete in the dueling circuit, your ceiling is capped. You can earn theory scores and simulation scores that would qualify you for command track in any other exam system in the galaxy, and the dueling circuit weighting will still pull your rank below threshold. It had been pulling human ranks below threshold for 11 consecutive trial cycles. Nobody had said this out loud in the hall. Appendix 7 said it clearly enough. After orientation, there was an equipment review session. Every cadet had to present their personal training equipment for logging. It was a formality, mostly. The station provided standardized gear for all phases, but personal items could be registered and approved for use in non-lethal circuit matches. I stood in line in the equipment bay. The line moved slowly. I had my training gloves out, my ankle braces, my hand wrap material. Standard items. Nothing unusual. The cadet in front of me was not from my cohort, he was Ketharan. I had read about Ketharans before arrival. Everyone had, the same way you read about weather before traveling somewhere that might have dangerous weather. Ketharans were the dominant dueling species in the trial system. They had held the top circuit ranking for 9 of the last 11 cycles. They were built on a scale that made the word built feel inadequate. This one was approximately 2.5 meters tall, with the layered natural armor plating that covered Ketharan upper bodies like overlapping shields of dark stone. His name, as I would later learn, was Throsfell. His record was already prominent in the pre-arrival materials. Highest simulation score in his cohort, undefeated in his last 14 training matches, projected as the frontrunner for top circuit ranking. He was also, at that moment, very loudly and very cheerfully amusing the 3 other Ketharan cadets beside him by holding up someone's piece of gear and commenting on it. The translator unit in my ear rendered the conversation in real time, with a half-second delay, and the slightly flat quality that good translation always has, like music played in the correct key, but without the resonance of the original. The item he was holding was a single dark elastic hair tie. It looked tiny in his hand. Wizthi said to his companions, not curious, performing curiosity. One of the others said something that the translator rendered as a species-specific idiom roughly equivalent to a shrug, the Ketharan equivalent of who knows, who cares. She brought a decoration to a duel, Throsfell said. His tone had that particular texture that does not need translation. The kind of amusement that is not really amusement. That is something heavier dressed in lighter clothes. His companions made sounds of agreement. One of them looked over at the human section of the line. I did not look away. He noticed. He held the hair tie up slightly higher, in the way a person holds something up when they want to make sure the owner sees them holding it. His expression, or what the visible portion of his face communicated given the plating, was the expression of someone waiting to see if the other person would react. I did not react. Not the way he was waiting for. I looked at the hair tie in his hand. I looked at the way his weight was distributed as he stood there. The slight forward lean on his right side. The right foot turned fractionally outward. The shoulder on that same side marginally lower than the left. A habit or a structural tendency. Something the body does so often it stops knowing it is doing it. Then I looked at his face. Then I looked back at the equipment line and waited for it to move. He lost interest within a few seconds. The hair tie was dropped onto the registration table without comment, and the equipment officer logged it and moved on. The moment passed the way most moments do, without ceremony. I collected my items. I collected the hair tie and put it back in my pouch. The equipment officer, a small Marathi who had seen everything and was moved by nothing, handed me my registration slip without looking up. I walked back to the human section of the queue. Nate was ahead of me, and he had heard enough of the exchange to have an opinion about it. He kept his voice low. You going to do something about that? Yes, I said. He looked at me. When? Not yet, he nodded. He understood enough about strategy to know that not yet is its own kind of answer. That night, lying on my bunk in the pale quiet of the station's sleep cycle, I took the hair tie out of the pouch and held it between my fingers. It was lighter than almost anything. It was older than it looked. Not this specific one, but the idea of it. Humans had been tying things back before they had metal, before they had writing, before They had cities or ships or the concept of other stars having other planets with other species who would one day hold a small elastic band and laugh at it. We had been getting ready to fight for longer than most species in that hall had been keeping records. I rolled the hair tie over my knuckles, the way I always did before sleep when something was running through my mind. I thought about Throsvell's right side lean. I thought about Lena's score suppression documentation. I thought about my grandmother's 47 pages. I thought, we did not come all this way to finish inside the threshold. I put the hair tie back in the pouch, closed the drawer, and went to sleep. Outside the porthole, the stars held no opinion. But somewhere inside me, something had already decided how this was going to end. 14 hours later, the exams began, and so did everything else. The theory phase started before I had finished my first cup of coffee. Not that coffee existed on Vethara Station in any form a human would describe as coffee. It was a warm liquid dispensed from a nutrition station that had been calibrated to produce something vaguely caffeinated for human metabolism. It tasted like the memory of coffee described by someone who had never actually had any. I drank it anyway, because the ritual of it mattered more than the flavor. Phase 1 ran for 6 days. Tactical theory covered strategic modeling, resource allocation under constraint, multi-species unit command dynamics, historical engagement analysis from across 15 centuries of recorded interstellar conflict, and applied probability frameworks for variable outcome scenarios. The examination format was adaptive. The system read your responses and adjusted the difficulty in real time, which meant that if you answered well, the questions got harder, and if you answered poorly, they got easier, and your final score reflected not just what you got right, but how high the ceiling was when you stopped. I answered carefully. Not slowly, carefully. There is a difference. Slow answers look like uncertainty. Careful answers look like confidence that has taken its time. I had been studying for this exam since I was 16 years old, and my grandmother sat me down at her kitchen table and said, "You are going to go, and you are going to be ready." She had not framed it as a question or an aspiration. She had framed it as a logistical statement, the way you might say, the transport leaves at 6, so we will eat at 5. It had the same energy. It had always been the plan. On day 2 of theory, the scores were posted internally, not publicly ranked, just individual result notifications, so each cadet knew their standing relative to threshold. I was at 68% above the command track theory threshold. Nate was at 71. Lena, despite, or possibly because of, the fact that she had spent part of the previous evening writing a formal grievance about the torque calculation bias, was at 74. The Catherine cohort scores in theory averaged lower than ours. That was not a surprise. The dueling circuit was where they were designed to dominate, and they knew it, and the scoring system knew it, and everyone knew it, and the system was structured accordingly. High theory scores with no circuit participation produced a final rank of approximately 42nd percentile for a human candidate. Top theory scores with full circuit participation and strong performance could break the command track certification line. The word could was doing significant work in that sentence. Nate, Lena, and I had established something that was not quite a formal alliance and not quite a friendship. It was the specific kind of bond that forms between people who are sharing an impossible task and have decided not to discuss whether it is impossible. We met in the small common area near our bunk room each evening and exchanged information the way humans have always exchanged information. Casually, over food, without rank or ceremony. Lena brought data. Nate brought pattern analysis. I brought observations that I had been collecting the way my grandmother had taught me to collect things, quietly, without announcing what you were doing. I had been watching Throsvell in every shared space and session. Not following him, not staring, watching, the way you watch weather. The way you watch anything that has the capacity to change your situation. He was remarkable. I mean that without any complicated feeling attached to it. He was genuinely, structurally exceptional. The kind of physical capability that is not just trained but grown, shaped by a biology that had been optimized over generations for exactly this kind of contest. In the simulation sessions, he moved through scenarios with an efficiency that looked almost relaxed. He did not appear to try hard. He appeared to find the correct answer the way water finds the lowest point, not by thinking about it, but by being the kind of thing that naturally arrives there. He was also consistent in a way that, if you were looking for it, was its own kind of vulnerability. Consistent things can be predicted. Consistent things have a shape. Once you know the shape of something, you know where its edges are. His right side lean was present in every simulation recording I reviewed. Slightly forward, slightly low. The right foot turned fractionally outward. It was more pronounced under physical exertion. It was most pronounced in the transition between offensive and defensive positions, the half-second when the body is reorganizing itself. That half-second was a doorway. I did not tell Nate or Lena about the doorway. Not yet. Some things are better held close until the moment arrives for them to be useful. Phase 2 began on day 7. Simulated warfare, individual format first, then unit. The individual simulations were run in enclosed pods that interfaced with each cadet's neural-adjacent sensory system via a non-invasive contact array. For humans, this meant a headset and a haptic suit. For Ketherans, it meant something more embedded, more direct. The result was an experience that was not quite real, and not quite unreal. Somewhere in the space between where your body knows things are not happening, and your nervous system has decided to respond as if they are. I ran 14 individual simulation scenarios over 3 days. I finished all 14. That sounds obvious until you learn that the average completion rate across all species was 11.6 because the scenarios were designed to escalate until they exceeded your threshold and generated a failure state. I did not fail any of them. I did not always win them. There is a difference. In 3 of the 14, I reached an outcome that scoring system classified as mission incomplete. Cadet survived. Not a win, not a failure, a continuation. The scoring system did not have a great framework for continuation. It logged it, noted it, and moved on. I noted that it noted it. The unit simulations were more interesting. Groups of 8 cadets, mixed species, assigned to shared tactical scenarios with no advance briefing on teammates. You had to figure out, in real time, who was good at what, who communicated in ways you could work with, who was going to make decisions that helped the group, and who was going to make decisions that helped themselves. I was placed in a unit with 6 non-human cadets and 1 other human, a young man from a different human cohort named Owen Cole, who I had not met before, who turned out to be the kind of person who listens twice as much as he speaks, which is one of the rarest and most valuable things in any kind of combat scenario. We finished our first unit simulation in 2nd place overall. In the second simulation, we finished first. The scoring officer logged our unit performance with a notation that I translated from the Galactic standard shorthand as something roughly equivalent to uncharacteristic result, humans. Lena, when I showed her the notation that evening, looked at it for a long moment and said, "They wrote that like it is a mistake they will correct for in the next round." "They might," I said. "Or," she said, "we make it a pattern instead of an anomaly." That was the thing about Lena. She understood that individual results are data points, but patterns are arguments. And arguments, presented correctly, are the most powerful things in any room. On day 11, the registration window for the dueling circuit opened. The station's common communication system posted the announcement in the morning, and by midday the registration list was already filling up with Ketheran names, Sorvan names, Marathi names. The circuit was their domain, and they moved into it the way people move into familiar rooms. Without hesitation, without ceremony, with the easy confidence of belonging. There were no human names on the list. Nate was eating when I came back from the registration terminal. He looked at my face and set down his utensil. "You registered," he said. "Yes." He was quiet for a moment then. "Why?" I pulled out the chair across from him and sat down. I thought about how to answer that in a way that was honest without being dramatic. Because drama was a luxury, and I was running a careful budget. "Because someone laughed at my hair tie," I said, "and I want to change what that hair tie means." He looked at me for a long moment. He was trying to decide if I was being sentimental. I was not. I was being precise. There is a significant difference between doing something because of emotion and doing something that uses emotion as a navigational instrument. I was not angry. I was oriented. The laugh had given me a direction the way a compass gives you north. Not by pulling you, but by showing you clearly where north is, and letting you decide what to do with that information. "The odds are going to be very bad," Nate said. "I know. The circuit scoring will not help us even if you perform well. The weighting system is." "I know," I said again. He picked up his utensil. He looked at his food. He said quietly, "Then you need to not just win. You need to win in a way that cannot be categorized correctly. You need to win in a way that breaks the category." I had not said that. He had arrived at it himself. That was why Nate Osei was going to be an exceptional officer someday. He understood that sometimes the goal is not to beat the system, but to reveal that the system was the wrong shape. I nodded. "Yes," I said, "exactly that." That evening the registration list was updated. 1 human name appeared below 608 others, Mira Voss, humanity's first voluntary dueling circuit entry in 11 cycles. By the following morning, the odds systems used by 3 separate species-run analysis platforms had calculated my probability of reaching the final round. All 3 returned the same figure, within 2 decimal points of each other. 4%. I checked all 3 myself. I sat with the number for a while. Then I put my hair tie on my wrist, the way I always did before training, and I went to the circuit practice floor. I had work to do. Throsvell's first circuit match was on day 14, and it lasted 4 minutes and 11 seconds. I watched it from the observer gallery with Lena and Owen. The gallery was crowded. Catherine matches drew attendance the way significant weather draws attention, out of a combination of genuine interest and the instinctive awareness that you are watching something that has real force behind it. The arena floor below was a standard circuit configuration, flat, circular, 30 meters across, with a boundary line and a sensor grid that registered contact points and force values in real time. His opponent was a Marathi cadet named Sivorath, who was by all measurable standards an exceptional fighter. Fast, technically precise, rated in the top 12% of the current circuit field. Sivorath lasted 4 minutes and 11 seconds. It was not a brutal match. That was the thing about Throsvell that most people missed, because they were looking at the physical scale and assuming brutality. He was not brutal. He was efficient. There is a meaningful distinction. Brutality wastes energy. Efficiency conserves it. He ended the match at the precise moment the opportunity presented itself, not a second before, not a second after. He used exactly the force required and no additional force. It was almost elegant. Sivorath walked off the floor under their own power. Throsvell walked off looking like he had been for a short walk. His right side, I said quietly. Lena glanced at me. What about it? Watch the recording later. He loads slightly right when he transitions from forward pressure to lateral movement. It is most visible in the last 40 seconds of a match when he is closing. She looked at me steadily. You are planning to still be standing in the last 40 seconds of a match with him? Yes. Owen on my other side said nothing. He just nodded very slightly, the way he always nodded when he had decided something was true. My first circuit match was on day 15. My opponent was a Sorvan cadet named Kethe V, which was not a personal name but a designation, because Sorvan used numerical designation systems for formal contexts, and the trials counted as formal. Kethe V was precise, fast in a specific mechanical way, and absolutely committed to a strategy that relied on ending the match within the first 3 minutes. I did not let the match end within the first 3 minutes. Sorvan physiology is optimized for speed and accuracy. What it is not optimized for is extended exertion at the same output level. They have exceptional burst capacity but a steep efficiency curve after the 6-minute mark. I knew this from the physiological briefings in the appendix materials. I suspected most other competitors had read the same materials and forgotten this detail because they had assumed no match against a Sorvan would last 6 minutes. I made the match last 9 minutes and 40 seconds. Kethe V landed more contacts in the first 3 minutes than I landed in the entire match. The sensor grid showed it clearly. Their strike accuracy was 91%. Mine was 63%. By the numbers, I was losing for most of the match. I was also not losing the match, which is a different thing. I was redirecting, absorbing where absorption was cheaper than evasion, giving ground that I intended to take back later, and conserving the specific energy reserves that I was going to need in the final 2 minutes. At 8 minutes and 20 seconds, Kethe V's pattern shifted. Not dramatically, but the timing between strike sequences extended by approximately half a second. Their lateral movement became fractionally less sharp on the left side. They were managing their output now, not executing it freely. They were past the efficiency curve. I stopped redirecting. I moved forward. The match ended at 9 minutes and 40 seconds. Kethe was outside the boundary line. The sensor grid registered a legal match conclusion. The scoring system logged it. I walked off the floor. My ribs ached from a contact in the 4th minute that had been harder than I showed at the time. I kept my face neutral. I kept my pace steady. In the observer gallery I could feel, without looking, the quality of attention that had shifted. Not applause, not celebration. Something quieter and more significant. The particular attention of people who have seen something that does not match the category they were using to sort things. Lena handed me a hydration pack when I came up to the gallery level. She did not say anything for a moment. Then she said, 63% contact accuracy and you still won. Accuracy is not always the point, I said. She thought about that. Endurance is the point. Endurance, I said, and knowing what you are saving it for. I looked across the gallery. On the far side, among the Catherine observer group, Throsvell was watching me. His expression was unreadable across the distance. He was very still. I held my gaze for exactly 2 seconds, then looked away. Let him calculate. Let him start building a model. I was going to be a very interesting problem for that model. My second circuit match was 2 days later. My opponent was a Marathi cadet. They went by Orin 3 in formal contexts, and they were the kind of opponent that made every other kind of opponent look simple. Marathi tactical cognition was different from human tactical cognition, in a way that was genuinely difficult to describe without the experience of it. They did not react to what you were doing. They reacted to what you were about to do. Their combat model updated so quickly and so continuously that fighting them felt less like fighting a person and more like fighting the version of yourself that exists 3 seconds in the future. The match lasted 11 minutes and 32 seconds. I won it by doing something that no combat algorithm designed by a non-human species had ever cleanly modeled. I took a hit I did not have to take. It was the 8th minute. Orin 3 had projected my movement arc correctly and was positioned to intercept me cleanly. The optimal evasion was clear. I could see it, and they could see that I could see it. If I took the evasion, they would be waiting for me, and we would reset into the same positional problem. Instead, I moved into the contact rather than away from it. I took the hit, a solid strike to the left shoulder that I had braced for, and absorbed. And in the process, I broke the positional geometry that their model was built on. They had not calculated for voluntary contact acceptance. Their update cycle, fast as it was, required a fraction of a second to process the anomaly. That fraction of a second was enough. The match ended 2 minutes later. I had a bruised shoulder and a legal win. Orin 3 stood at the boundary for a long moment after the sensor grid logged the conclusion, looking at me with the kind of expression that crosses species. The expressions of someone revising something they thought they understood. Took a hit on purpose, Owen said, when I came up to the gallery. He said it the way a person states a fact they are still slightly amazed by. Yes. Why? Because it was cheaper than the alternative, I said. I spent a bruised shoulder to buy a positional advantage. The exchange rate was good. He was quiet for a moment. Humans calculate hit acceptance differently than other species. Most species calculate hit acceptance based on damage avoidance, I said. We calculate it based on what it buys you. We have been doing that since before we had arenas, he nodded. Because you did not always have the option of full avoidance. We almost never had the option of full avoidance, I said. We are not the biggest, or the fastest, or the strongest thing on almost any terrain we have ever existed on. So we learned to absorb what we could not avoid and keep moving. It is not a fighting style. It is a very old habit. The observation gallery had gone quieter than it should have been for the end of a match. Not all of the attention was from our group. I could feel it distributed around the gallery space. People from different cohorts, different species, watching a human cadet walk off the circuit floor, with a bruised shoulder and a winning record, and an approach to combat that none of their preparation materials had adequately described. Throsvel was not in the gallery that day. I noted the absence, the bracket posted that evening. 8 cadets remained in the circuit competition. The final structure was a single elimination round that would take place over 2 days. I read the bracket. I traced the lines. If the bracket held, if no major upsets occurred in the other matches, the semifinal and final pairing mathematics produced one inescapable outcome. Mira Voss versus Throsvel. I sat with the bracket on my datapad for a long time. Lena came to stand beside me and looked at it. She did not say anything reassuring, because she was not a person who said reassuring things when honest things were available instead. She said, "His right side lean is most pronounced at transition." Yes, I said. And you will need to still be fully functional at that point in the match for the information to be useful. Yes. She looked at the bracket for another moment. Then the semifinal is a resource management problem. Everything is a resource management problem, I said. The match, the exam, the last 11 cycles of humans coming here and finishing below threshold, it is all the same problem. You have to know what you are spending and what you are spending it on. She put her hand briefly on my uninjured shoulder, the right one, and then went back to her bunk. Nate came in a few minutes later, saw my face and saw the bracket, and sat down without speaking. Outside the porthole, the stars were the same as they had always been. Vethara station turned slowly in the dark. Somewhere on the other side of the station, I was fairly certain, Throsvel was reviewing the same bracket and running the same calculation. I hoped he was confident. Confident things stop looking for the shape of you. Confident things assume they already know. I pulled out the small cloth pouch and set it on the bunk beside me. I did not take the hair tie out. I just let it sit there while I reviewed the recording of every Thros-Vel match in the current circuit. 6 matches, played back slowly, with the movement analysis overlay turned on. The right side leaned the transition moment, the half-second doorway. I watched it 17 times. I watched it until I could close my eyes and see the shape of it without the recording. Then I put the pouch away and went to sleep, because rest was also a resource. And tomorrow was another day of the exam, and I had precise and specific plans for every unit of energy remaining in my body. Tomorrow was not the day. The day after tomorrow was not the day. But the day was coming, and I was going to be ready for it. I had been getting ready for a very long time. The morning of the semi-final, I ate well and said almost nothing. Nate brought food to the common area table and set it in front of me without commentary. Lena reviewed her documentation for the scoring grievance she was planning to file on day 9. She had moved the timeline forward by 2 days after calculating that the circuit results would create a more favorable context for the argument. Owen Cole came by briefly, on his way to his own scheduled evaluation, and put his hand on the table for a moment, a human gesture, brief and unceremonious, the kind of thing that does not need a word attached to it. I nodded. He left. My semi-final opponent was a cadet named Drev Koss, second ranked in the Kethrin circuit cohort, not Thros-Vel but built from similar specifications. Larger than most species, fast in a way that was incongruent with the scale, and carrying the specific kind of assurance that came from a body that had never been seriously outmaneuvered. I had 4 goals entering the match: win, reveal as little as possible about my full range, spend no more energy than necessary, exit the match with both shoulders functional. The last goal was the most difficult. Drev Koss was not subtle. The match lasted 7 minutes and 51 seconds and involved more direct physical contact than either of my previous matches combined. I took 3 solid hits, 1 to the left forearm, 1 to the right hip, 1 to the upper chest that I felt for the rest of the day. I absorbed all 3 without changing my expression and kept moving. I won through a combination of spatial awareness and a technique that human close-quarters practitioners had been using for a very long time, using the momentum of a larger, faster opponent as a component of your own movement rather than a force to be resisted. Drev Koss committed to a forward drive in the 5th minute, with the weight and speed of something that expected impact to end the contest. I gave him the impact. I gave him the direction he wanted, and then I redirected, stepped laterally, and the momentum that had been pointed at me was suddenly pointed at empty floor space. He recovered quickly. He was very good. But recovery costs time, and time costs energy, and by the 6th minute I could read in the timing of his movements that the reserves were lower than they had been at the start. The match ended in the 7th minute. He was outside the boundary. I was inside it. I walked off the floor slowly, the way I had walked off after every match, not because I was badly hurt, but because controlled movement signals, control was a message I wanted to send to every observer in the gallery. Thros-Vel was in the gallery this time. He was watching. Good. The second semifinal, Thros-Vel versus a Sorvan cadet named Velsona, lasted 3 minutes and 40 seconds. It was not close. Thros-Vel won the way a problem is solved when someone finally applies exactly the right approach. Cleanly, completely, without unnecessary additional steps. The bracket updated. The final was posted for the following morning. I went back to my bunk. I did not review recordings. I did not run analysis. I had done all the analysis available to me over the preceding days, and reviewing it again would not add new information. It would only add noise. Instead, I went through a set of movement exercises that I had been doing since I was 15 years old. Slow, deliberate, not training but maintenance. Keeping the body reminded of what it knew. Staying connected to the physical vocabulary that all the thinking in the world cannot replace. Nate came in at some point and sat on his bunk and read. He did not speak. I did not speak. It was one of the most comfortable silences I had experienced since arriving on Vithara Station. Before sleep, I took out the cloth pouch and set it on the surface beside the bunk. I took out 1 hair tie and put it on my wrist. Not for any practical reason. My hair was already contained for the night, but for the same reason my grandmother had always worn the small silver ring on her right hand during every important moment of her career. Because objects can carry intention. An intention carried in the body is intention that does not have to be reconstructed from scratch when the moment arrives. I was ready, not ready the way you feel ready when you are nervous and hoping the feeling holds. Ready the way a door is ready when it has been correctly hung on its frame, stable, aligned, waiting for the moment it needs to open. I slept. I did not check the odds the morning of the final. I had checked them once, on the day I registered, and they had said 4%. By now the analysis platforms had presumably updated their models. I had given them new data across 3 matches, but whatever number they had arrived at was not information I needed. Numbers about probability were useful for calibration. I was done calibrating. I was in the execution phase, and the execution phase required a different kind of attention. I ate. I ran the slow movement exercises again. I put my hair tie on my wrist. The arena was full. That was the first thing I noticed when I walked in. Not the noise, but the density of the observation spaces. Every gallery level had people in it. Not just the student cohorts, station staff, administrative officers. A row of figures in the elevated box near the scoring panel that I later learned were members of the trial board, who attended significant circuit matches as a matter of record. The light in the arena was the same standard pale blue as everywhere on the station, but with the additional track lighting that activated for circuit finals, which gave the floor space below a quality of brightness that made everything on it look very clear and very serious. Thros Vel was already on the floor when I entered. He was standing near the center marker, and he turned when the entry signal sounded. His posture communicated what his face was harder to read. He was ready, fully, in the way that someone is ready when they have done this so many times that readiness is indistinguishable from their resting state. He looked at me. I looked at him, then he looked at my wrist, the hair tie, same dark elastic band I had been wearing since day one. He looked at it the way he had looked at it in the equipment bay, with the same quality of performance, the same invitation to react. She brought a decoration to the final, he said. The translator caught it perfectly. His companions in the gallery section made the same sounds they had made the first time. The sound moved through the other gallery sections, some catching the translation, some simply responding to the cue of the Ketharan laughter. I looked at the hair tie on my wrist. I looked at Thros Vel. Then I reached up and pulled my hair back and I tied it, slowly, deliberately. The same way I had been doing it since I was 14 years old in a school gym on Earth, pulling my hair back before sparring the small private signal to my own body. I took the time it needed. I did not rush it because he was watching. I did not rush it because the gallery was watching. I tied my hair back the way I always tied my hair back, which was the only way I knew how, which was with full attention and without apology. The gallery went quiet, not all at once. It moved through the space like a change in air pressure, sections becoming still as the gesture registered, and the noise fell away. By the time I finished and lowered my hands, the arena was very quiet. The match official's signal sounded. The boundary sensors activated. The match began. He came at me fast. Faster than any of the recordings had fully communicated. Because recordings compress the quality of speed in ways you cannot account for until you are standing in front of it. The first contact happened in the first 11 seconds. He moved through the opening distance with 2 steps where other species would have taken 4, and his first strike landed on my right forearm as I brought it up. The sensor grid registered it. The force value flashed on the scoring panel. It was high. I had braced for it. I let my arm give slightly with the contact and redirected the force path down and away from my center. It hurt. I noted the hurt and filed it in the section of my mind that was not currently running the match. The first 2 minutes were his. He was faster, heavier, and better at the opening phase of the match than anything I had encountered in the circuit. I gave ground deliberately, not retreating, but spending ground the way I had spent the shoulder contact against Orin 3. Every setback was a purchase. Every contact absorbed was a calculation. What am I learning? What is this costing me versus what is it costing him? He landed 4 clean contacts in the first 2 minutes. I landed 1. A glancing strike to his left shoulder in the 42nd second that the sensor grid logged at a force value that was probably not meaningful to him physically. But it registered. It was there. In the 3rd minute, he changed approach. He had expected the ground giving to continue and had been building his momentum around that expectation. When I stopped giving ground, stopped fully planted, and pushed back into a forward position, the shift required him to adjust. The adjustment was fast, but it happened. And in that adjustment, in that half second of reorganization, I saw the lean right. Slightly forward, right foot fractionally outward, right shoulder fractionally lower. The doorway. I did not go through the doorway yet. It was too early. The match was not there yet. I filed the observation and kept moving. The middle phase of the match, minutes 3 through 6, was the section I had planned for most carefully, because it was the section where I would need to manage 2 things simultaneously: keeping enough of myself intact to be effective in the final minutes, and making myself appear to be more fatigued than I was. Not dramatically, not theatrically. Just the small, honest-looking adjustments that a fighter makes when they are working very hard. The slightly wider stance, the fractionally slower recovery between contacts, the breathing that is controlled but visibly effortful. He read it. Of course he read it. He was exceptional. He read the fatigue signals, and he adjusted his strategy toward them, pressing forward with more consistent pressure because he believed I was approaching a threshold. He was correct that I was approaching something. He was incorrect about what it was. In the 5th minute, he landed the hardest contact of the match, a full-force strike to my left side that the sensor grid logged at a value that made the gallery react audibly. My ribs. The same ribs that had been sensitive since the semifinal. I felt the impact move through my body in a wave, and I registered the quality of it. Not broken, but significant. And then I pushed the registration to the filing section and kept my feet. He paused for just a fraction of a second. The pause was not tactical. It was the instinctive pause of someone who has hit a target at full force and expected the target to go down. I did not go down. The pause was small. But I had been watching for something exactly that small, and when it happened I was already moving. Not toward him laterally. I moved to his right side, his right my left because I had spent 6 days studying the lean, and I knew the lean was stronger going forward, and weaker going lateral. I moved into the space that the lean created when his weight was fully committed forward, and he needed to reorganize to the right. The reorganization took longer than it should have because I was not where his model said I would be. The doorway opened. I had 6 seconds. The match record would later show the sequence in detail. 3 movement decisions, 2 contact points, 1 positional conclusion. I was not thinking in those terms at the time. At the time, there was no thinking in the way that word is usually meant. There was only the body doing what it had practiced, what it had absorbed, what it had spent 14 years preparing to do without preparation in the moment. His right side, his weight, his reorganization, the direction he had to commit to in order to recover. I moved with him instead of against him. His recovery motion was large and fast and certain. I used that certainty. I put myself in the path of where he needed his weight to go, and I redirected it. Not resisting, not bracing, but channeling. The way a river channel does not stop water but shapes where it goes. He went outside the boundary. The sensor grid registered the conclusion. The scoring panel updated. The arena was completely still. Throsvell stood outside the boundary line. He was upright. He was uninjured. He was looking at the position he was standing in with the expression of someone who is doing a very precise accounting of the last 6 seconds and finding that the mathematics do not match what they expected. Then he looked at me. I was inside the boundary. My ribs hurt. My left forearm ached from the first 2 minutes. My legs were tired in the deep specific way that legs get tired after a sustained effort. Not the surface tired that goes away with rest, but the substantive tired that means something real was spent. I was breathing harder than I wanted to show. I kept my face where I had kept it for the entire match. Neutral, attentive, present. I walked toward the boundary line. I stopped in front of him. He said something. The translator caught it and delivered it with the half-second delay and the flat, careful quality of good translation. "What are you?" I looked at him. He had asked the question with genuine curiosity, not hostility, not performance. The laugh in the equipment bay had been performance. This was different. This was the question a person asks when something has gone outside the edges of their model, and they are trying to build a new one. I reached out my hand. Human gesture. Open palm, extended toward him. On this station, with 612 cadets from 19 species, it was possibly one of the most human-specific things I had done since arriving. "We are the species that kept getting back up," I said. He looked at my hand, he looked at my face. Then he reached out and took it, his hand around mine, which required a grip adjustment on his part to accommodate the difference in size. He held it for a moment. Then he let go. He turned and walked back toward the Catherine section of the gallery. He did not say anything else. Neither did I. The arena noise started a few seconds later. Not the roar of a sports event, but the particular multi-species sound of surprise and assessment, and something that might have been the word the Galactic standard translator would render as reconsideration. It moved through the gallery levels like weather. I stood in the middle of the circuit floor and let it happen around me. Nate was at the floor-level entry when I came off the arena floor. He did not say anything for a moment. Then he said, "That was a very human fight." "Yes," I said. "Not because of the technique." "No," I said. "Because of the math. Because of what I was willing to spend and when I was willing to spend it." He nodded. Lena was behind him, and she had her data pad out. and she was already documenting the match results with the specific focused energy of someone who knows that evidence needs to be recorded while it is fresh. Owen was there too, and he handed me a hydration pack without words, and I drank it. My ribs hurt significantly. I was going to need medical attention before the end of the day. That was fine. The medical attention could wait until after I had finished standing upright. The hair tie was still in my hair, which struck me, in that moment, as genuinely funny. I had tied it before the match, and it had held through all of it. Small, plain, ordinary. It had been there the whole time. I took it off my hair and put it back on my wrist. Old habit. Same as always. I was ready for whatever came next. The trial board convened its formal review session 2 days after the final. I was not in the room, obviously. The board proceedings were closed, and cadets were not informed of the agenda or the deliberations. I found out what happened in that room the same way most information moves through a station full of cadets who are simultaneously exhausted, accomplished, and deeply invested in the outcome. Through Lena, who had been filing documentation with the scoring office and had learned things from the procedural record that had been inadvertently made accessible to her in the response to her formal grievance. Throsvell had petitioned the board, not in writing, in person. He had requested a standing appearance before the board's review session and had used the formal petition protocol that the trial charter provided to any competing cadet who wished to present an observation regarding exam structure or scoring methodology. It was a rarely used provision. Nobody in the current cycle had used it before him. He told the board, and Lena's documentation of the procedural record captured this in summary form, which I read 3 times in the common area while my ribs ached and the hydration pack sat in my hand getting warm, that the current classification framework for assessing human candidates was structurally inadequate, not unfair, not discriminatory, inadequate. There was a distinction in the language that was apparently significant in Ketharan formal communication, a critique of design rather than intent. His specific argument, as summarized in the procedural record, was that the existing categories had been designed to measure capability along vectors that human combat methodology did not primarily occupy. Humans did not fight like non-warrior species, and they did not fight like warrior species as the category had historically defined them. They fought like something that the category system did not have a box for, something that was built around sustained function under accumulated cost, strategic willingness to absorb damage for positional gain, and an apparently deep-rooted adaptability that expressed itself most clearly under extended pressure. You have been measuring them with the wrong instrument, the procedural record summarized. An instrument that cannot measure what it cannot fit. I read that line 4 times. The board deliberation was not swift. 3 species-represented board members objected to the reclassification motion, on grounds that the category framework had been stable for 200 years, and that one circuit performance by one cadet from one cohort was insufficient evidence to warrant structural revision. Their objections were formally recorded. 2 members abstained on grounds of insufficient time to review the proposal. The Ketharan board member, the Sorvan representative, and the Marathi delegate voted in favor of the reclassification motion. The motion passed. The new category did not have a name yet. The formal naming process was an entirely separate procedural track that would take additional cycles to resolve. The interim designation, assigned by the board's administrative office for scoring and documentation purposes, had been translated from its original composite language formulation into Galactic Standard as Persistent Combatant, Tier Undefined. Tier Undefined, not unranked, not unclassified. Undefined meaning the upper boundary had not yet been established, meaning the instrument was being recalibrated because the existing measurements had not found the ceiling. I sat with that for a long time. Nate's final scores, re-evaluated under the new classification, cleared the command track threshold by a margin of 9 points. Lena's cleared it by 14. Mine cleared it by 22. All 3 of us received certification notifications on the same day. A quiet message delivered to our data pads with the standard formatting and the standard language, and absolutely no indication that it was anything other than a routine administrative update. Routine, as if this had always been possible, as if the category had always had room for us. That was the most extraordinary part of it, I thought, that once the category changed, the results looked inevitable. Of course, 3 human cadets from a cohort this prepared should have passed. Of course, the scores were there. The scores had always been there. The instrument had simply been pointed at the wrong thing. Owen Cole from the other human cohort received his notification the same day. He had not competed in the dueling circuit. He had qualified through simulation scores, re-evaluated under the new standards. He found me in the common corridor and said, with his characteristic economy of words, "Your grandmother would have filed a different kind of paperwork." "She would have," I said. "But she would have liked how this one turned out." He smiled, briefly, and went on his way. On my last evening at Vethara Station, I was in the observation bay, the long curved corridor with the large viewport windows that looked directly out into the unfiltered dark. Most cadets had already begun their departure processing. The station had a different quality to it in the final days, less dense, more echo in the corridors, the particular atmosphere of a place that is between things. I heard steps behind me. Catherine steps have a specific quality, heavier than most, with a slight resonance in the floor material. I did not turn immediately. I finished looking at the stars for a moment. Then I turned. Throsfell stood at the entrance to the observation bay. He was not in the full formal uniform he had worn to the match. He was in the casual, station wear that most cadets used when they were not actively competing. And it made him look, paradoxically, more formidable rather than less, the way that very large things look more themselves when they are not formally contained. He walked to the viewport and stood beside me. He looked at the stars. I looked at the stars. Neither of us spoke for a while. The silence had a quality to it that was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who have already said the important things and do not need to repeat them. Then he said, "I want to understand what you used." "I used what I had," I said. "Every fighter uses what they have, yes," I said. "But we have been using what we have for a very long time. In places where what we had was not much. That changes what you do with it." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Show me the thing." I knew what he meant. I reached into the pocket where I kept the small cloth pouch and took out one of the hair ties and held it out to him. He took it with a care that was slightly surprising, given the scale of his hands. He held it between two fingers, with the delicacy of someone handling something they have decided to take seriously. He turned it. He examined it. He was genuinely looking at it. The way you look at something when you have been given reason to believe it means more than its appearance. He held it for perhaps 30 seconds. Then he held it back out at me. I took it. "I understand it now," he said. I did not explain further. I believed he actually did, or at least that he understood it the way an outside person can understand a thing that belongs to a different history. Not from the inside, but with genuine respect for what the inside is. "Your petition," I said. "That was not required." "No," he said. "It was accurate. Accuracy is required." The petition followed from that. He looked at the stars for another moment. Then he said, "There will be more humans here." "Yes," I said, "and they will know what category they are in." He made a sound, not quite the laugh from the equipment bay, but related to it. Except this time it had a different quality entirely. This time it sounded like recognition. He turned and walked back toward the corridor entrance. At the threshold, he paused without turning. He said something that the translator caught and rendered, in the flat, careful way of good translation. A decoration that won the final. "I will not forget the instrument." Then he left. I stood at the viewport for a while longer. The hair tie was in my hand. Outside, the stars were the same as they had always been. The same as the night my grandmother had stood outside the flight academy, and someone had taken her photograph. The same as every night my mother had run simulations in an empty training room after hours, building towards something she would not reach herself but would hand forward. The same as every night any human had ever looked up at something larger than themselves and thought, "We can reach that. We can figure out how to reach that." We had always been doing this. Not because we were the strongest, or the fastest, or the most precisely built for any single category of challenge, but because we were the ones who kept moving when the cost became high. We were the ones who absorbed what we could not avoid and recalculated without stopping. We were the ones who tied our hair back in the equipment bay of an alien station while someone laughed, and noted the lean on the right side, and filed it carefully, and waited. We brought small ordinary things to impossible situations. We had been doing it since before we had a word for courage, since before we had metal, since before we had ships that could carry us to stations where other species kept their records of who was worth measuring, and what category to put them in. We tied our hair back, we showed up, we kept getting back up. That was the whole story. That had always been the whole story. And now, finally, permanently, in the formal record of the interstellar combat trials, filed under the certification documents of 4 human cadets, that story had an official category, tier undefined. Not because we had no ceiling, because they had not found it yet. I put the hair tie back in the pouch. I put the pouch in my pocket. I picked up my bag from the floor where I had set it down. I walked toward the departure corridor. Somewhere ahead of me, Nate was already in the processing queue. Lena was probably still filing documentation. Owen was probably already packed, efficient and unhurried the way he always was. And somewhere behind me, on the data records of the trial board, the category had changed. The instrument had been recalibrated. The ceiling was still being mapped. I walked toward the transport. The stars held no opinion. I did not need them to. I had my own.